Hello everyone, my name is Joe Wilks and welcome back to another round of the ApexOnlineRacing Season 15 F1 Championship brought to you by Hype Energy, and we are here today for round number 5 for the Spanish Grand Prix, a racetrack which sees the start of the main European season. And it is the Flying Finn who has taken 4 victories from 4 this season. He took the victory here in Season 14 as well. And the question upon everyone's lips is whether he'll be able to make it 5 in a row. Looking at the qualifying rundown, you can see that he took pole position once again this afternoon. And it was Cryo Lockdown who will line up on the front row alongside him, surprisingly in the Sauber. Just behind him is Danny M7 with Surprise lining up on row 2 as well in P4. The Flying Finn's closest rival is Surprise, and just behind him in the championship is NLR Evo, who'll start in 5th for Ferrari, alongside P1R Brown for an impressive qualifying for Force India. STS F1 Alonso, the teammate of the Flying Finn, will start in P7 alongside CRL Hamilton, who is yet to get off the mark in terms of points and will be looking to do so this afternoon. EVR Morso will line up alongside Veloce Limitless to round out the top 10. The notable absence from the top 10 in qualifying was TRL Martin, the reserve driver who has put in a couple of good races so far this season, but he opted not to set a time and unfortunately wasn't able to join the lobby and meant that he was not able to start the race. Before we get into the race action, we're going to take a look at a qualifying comparison between 2 drivers and take you for a lap of the Catalunya circuit. Today's qualifying comparison sees the Ferrari of NLR Evo on the left-hand side up against CRL Rosberg in the Toro Rosso on the right. They're both currently flying down the main straight in 8th gear before braking at that 100 meter board into turn 1 and then going left into turn 2. Evo taking a lot of the inside curb there before going into the sweeping right-hander of turn 3. Rosberg holding it in 6th gear for a very long time there before now ending the first sector, at which point Evo is slightly ahead of Rosberg, and now they go into turn 4. Holding it in 4th is Evo compared to Rosberg, who took that one in 5th, but now going into the left of 5, down into 3rd gear and trying to minimise the wheel spin on exit before they go through the almost non-corner of turn 6 and towards the left right of 7 and 8. A tricky corner to get right, you can't take too much curb or get too greedy there, and now it's braving it out through turn 9. Neither of the drivers hitting the brakes, trying to keep full throttle for as long as possible and onto the DRS and towards the end of sector 2, at which point Evo has slightly extended his lead over Rosberg. Going down into 3rd gear now for turn 10 and through turn 11 and into the right of turn 12. A very frustrating corner for the drivers. They want to get the throttle down as soon as possible, and now the 90-degree right-hander of 13 before another frustrating corner, the chicane at 14 and 15. The drivers now just want the lap to end, and coming through the final corner you can see that Evo has taken this qualifying comparison as well as 5th place on the grid. So getting to the race start now, and it was a wet race in Catalonia. All the drivers on the intermediate tyres, but as they got off the line, it was clear that the top 5 drivers had started reasonably well, but P1R Brown fell from P6 all the way down to P11 before turn 1. It was also a poor start from Danny M7, who fell from P3 all the way down into P5, with Surprise and Evo making moves. And then it was the turn of STS F1 Alonso to take a look at the drifting Red Bull driver into turn 5, the Mercedes man slipping it down the inside. And they weren't done there, with CRL Hamilton trying to have a go at Danny into the middle sector, and that capped off a pretty poor start for the Red Bull man. On to lap 2 now, and it was absolute carnage from P9 downwards. EVR Reynolds trying to hold off the fight from further behind. TOR Leopard, EVR Morso, CRL Rosberg and P1R Brown all trying to make a move on the Force India man. Going just outside of the points paying positions for the battle for P13 and going through the sweeping turn 3. It's a wonderful move down the inside by Pinecone on the Red Bull of Joe. A lovely move down the inside, very composed from the young Haas driver who moved up to 13th. It was still an intense battle for the periphery of the points, with AOR Rosberg going down the inside of EVR Morso, meaning the Toro Rosso man, Rosberg, had made up 4 positions from his starting place. On to lap 7 now, and there was a real battle for the second and final podium positions between Cryo Lockdown, NLR Evo, and STS F1 Alonso, who was just waiting in the wings if anything were to happen between the 2 front drivers. Flying Finn had checked out at the front, but this battle looked as if it wasn't going to avail anytime soon, with Cyril Hamilton also waiting in the wings. It did, however, take another 6 laps for any action to occur, with NLR Evo trying to go down the inside of Cryo Lockdown into turn 1, getting it all slowed down in time as Lockdown ran slightly wide, which then allowed the Mercedes of STS F1 Alonso to move up into a podium position. A bad couple of corners for Lockdown, moving from 2nd down to 4th. Well, we've just seen the one Mercedes of STS F1 Alonso, but the other one of the Flying Finn was really checking out up at the front, getting a 10-second lead over his nearest challenger Evo with just 14 laps gone. On to lap 15, and we're getting towards half race distance, which means that it is time for the pit stops. Getting down into the Williams garage, though, there was confusion as they were double stacking their drivers, meaning that TOR Leopard lost out big, meaning he'll rejoin low down in the order. Another lap ticked by and more pit stops had been completed. And now going to the battle for P10, Veloce Limitless with a massive tank slapper, moving him down into P11 and making it very difficult for him to score good points. The Flying Finn then made his way into the pits at the end of lap 16, rejoining in the lead a long way ahead of his nearest challenger, Evo. Further back in the order, it was Cryo Lockdown and Cyril Rosberg battling it out, but a huge lag spike for Cryo Lockdown made it very difficult for him to race anybody, meaning that he had to retire from the session, so bitterly disappointing for someone who had started this race so high up in P2. Limitless was not wanting to wait around in P11 after having a difficult couple of laps, but he moved right down the inside of Drawmaster in a very composed move there, meaning that he was back up into the points in P10. Lap 23 now with 10 laps to go in the race, and the Williams team had recommended for TOR Leopard to go on to the wet tyres, but as you can see here, through these few corners, it wasn't looking like the right decision from the German. Lap 26 now, and the battle for the final podium position looked as if it was going to go all the way down to the wire, with Danny M7 and Cyril Rosberg, both of which would fancy that they still have a chance to get onto the podium, battling it out. And after Cyril Hamilton went deep into the hairpin at turn 10, Danny left himself vulnerable to Rosberg in this final section of corners, and as they come now towards the chicane, Danny then runs wide, allowing Rosberg to go through into P5. The afternoon went from bad to worse for Danny after he had to pit at the start of lap 30, presumably as a result of high tyre wear, dropping him into P10. And that was to presumably stop what happened to Cyril Hamilton, who was running in P4, getting a left front puncture with just over a lap remaining, and that dropped him all the way out of the points. Cyril Hamilton's loss was a lot of other drivers' gain, one of which being Danny M7, who of course pitted a couple of laps ago and was wasting no time in trying to make up more positions, getting a big tank slapper on there. But after already moving ahead of Surprise on lap 33, he also went for a move down the inside of Limitless into turn 10, pulling it off very nicely. And then as they came towards the final chicane, Surprise also looked for a move on the Ferrari driver of Limitless, getting up into P8 with just over a corner remaining, and it was a very impressive end to the race in the bottom end of the top 10. Now getting on to the race classification, and we didn't see much of him, but it was the Flying Finn who took victory for the 5th time this season and the 12th time in a row, extending all the way back to about halfway through season 14, meaning he has surpassed the record of Noble 2909 with the most victories in Xbox Split 1. Coming home in second was NLR Evo after an impressive second stint, which left him just 8.5 seconds behind Finn, and about 24 seconds ahead of STS F1 Alonso, who came home in third. That is Alonso's first podium since the first race of the season, meaning he'll have a lot of his confidence back, and he finished just 0.2 of a second ahead of CRL Rosberg, who after a poor qualifying impressed during the race once again. EVR Morso came home in P5, bringing 10 points home for the McLaren team, just ahead of Pinecone in P6, taking his best result of the season. Surprise just about maintains P2 in the driver's standings, but it was only P7 for him this afternoon, just ahead, of course, of Limitless, who he overtook at the final chicane. Danny M7 only managed P9, meaning that his excursions on the final couple of laps, well, they pretty much meant nothing because of the fact that he had a 3-second penalty, but they did ensure that he finished ahead of Drawmaster in P10, who brought home the final point for McLaren. On to the second half of the order, and there was only 3 more drivers that were in fact classified, and that was P1R Brown, Sam F1 and CRL Hamilton. The rest of the drivers did not make the checkered flag, with Cryo Lockdown, of course, having those technical issues, meaning that he couldn't convert his P2 into any sort of points, which must have been bitterly disappointing for him. EVR Reynolds, TOR Leopard, OMG It's Joe, LGS, did not make the checkered flag as well, with TRL Martin not in fact making the start of the race, which is disappointing for him. But all in all, it really was a fantastic Grand Prix with battles up and down the field. So it is, of course, the Flying Finn still on top of the standings, unsurprisingly, and it is 5 wins from 5, a maximum 125 points, and you just wonder whether anyone can stop him this season. Just behind him, or sorry, quite a long way behind him in the championship is Surprise in P2, just ahead of NLR Evo by the solitary point. STS F1 Alonso maintains P4 in the championship, but puts a little bit more ground between himself and P5 in the championship. Moving up into P5 is CRL Rosberg in the second Toro Rosso. The Toro Rosso team being very impressive so far this season, and EVR Morso is another driver who moves up the standings, up from P8 to P6. Down into P7 is EVR Reynolds, and also moving down is TOR Leopard. It was an impressive start to the season from Leopard, but he seems to have just dropped off in the last couple of races, and rounding out the top 10 we have Veloce Limitless and Danny M7. The Constructors' standings pretty much stay as they were after Bahrain, with Mercedes extending their gap at the top 172 points, meaning they're 71 points ahead of Toro Rosso in P2. Bear in mind, we've only had 5 races so far this season. Ferrari dropped further back in P3, with Force India there in P4, a long way back from 3rd place. McLaren had a pretty impressive weekend, taking 11 points, meaning they stay in P5 but move closer to Force India, with Williams there in P6, Red Bull 7th, Sauber 8th, and it was Haas the only movers in the championship, getting ahead of Renault into P9. So that was your Spanish Grand Prix. I hope you guys enjoy it. Do make sure to leave a like if you did. But until the next round, which will be at Silverstone, interestingly enough. Yeah, I'll see you guys for that race. Take care. Bye-bye.